What's up, everybody? It's I, Flamingo Writer, here once again for another Magical Girl series. And like I said in the community post, this might be one of the more influenced Magical Girl shows out there. Yeah, Sailor Moon may have had the spotlight, but even with that said, there have been plenty of Magical Girl shows out there in the 90s that still have their drawn into inspiration, though. But before we get into that, though, this is actually the first time I've actually talked about a Josie I demographic. Basically, if you're familiar, it's the opposite. CNN, where it's mostly done for a male adult audience, whereas Josie I is more for a female adult audience. It's surprisingly one of those demographics that I've only recently started watching more and more, though, but I'm still catching up on JoJo, if that's anything to judge by. However, back in the 90s, when Magical Girl shows were pretty popular with Sailor Moon and the like, sometimes there comes a time when there's a bit of subtext to some expense. I mean, sure, Sailor Moon had that with Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune, but those characters were more of side characters more than anything. Or in this case, supporting characters, because they always come back every time, though. Even with that said, however, I seem to always think that there's always something about the queer demographic that I'm not used to. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the yaoi and yuri demographic, but to be fair, though, I'm not saying that it's bad anyways. No, my problem with it doesn't come from that, but it's mostly because they always shove it down your throat like, say, we know that they're gay, so here, this is what they're like. But what happens if I tell you there was a series out subtext, but it also had Magical Girl elements involved, surrealism, a bit of Josie I demographic, and it also seems to be more influential than you may think. Enter Revolutionary Girl Utena. Now, I must stress enough, Revolutionary Girl Utena was actually one of those shows that I've had on my radar for quite some time, though. I started watching it last year, but unfortunately this ain't without its drawbacks. You see, by the time of this recording, it's been almost a year ago since I've last seen this show. While I didn't really watch it in its entirety, though, my binging through this show wasn't really what it was hoping to have, though. You see, I started watching this around Father's Day, and let me tell you, this was back at the time when I was still searching for Magical Girl shows, and this was during the time when I was already finished with Magic Knight Ray Earth, so Revolutionary Girl Utena may be one of those shows I actually got myself into already, but I never really exactly should have had, though. I wouldn't have that much of a problem, but honestly, despite having 39 episodes in one season, it's also pretty clear to me that I did not expect myself to get into this until sooner or later. And honestly, even if you've never heard of Revolutionary Girl, well, that's just me talking about it and what made it influence, and some other stuff we'll get to along the way. So let's grant the power of revolution and see where it takes us from here. The main series itself focuses around a tomboyish schoolgirl student herself named Utena Tenjo. And unfortunately, though, she seems to have a lot things going for her as is, though. You see, in this year's series, her parents died when she was just a young little girl at 7 years old, though. Unfortunately, after her parents died at the age of 7, though, due to an unknown accident, it's here where she meets up with some kind of noble prince traveling with a white horse and such. As you can tell, though, she gets help from him, though, and also he gives her a ring and sorts with a significant rose into it, and never lose her nobility, though. So impressed by this, though, Utena decides to claim herself into becoming a prince herself. Unfortunately, though, it seems like all of it's lost, though, when she doesn't remember who was the prince that helped her out years ago. Cut to 7 years later, however, we meet up with the main character, Utena herself, and right away she gets bitched at by the school teacher, all because she's wearing a schoolboy's uniform. Lady, I have no idea what you're talking about, though. I mean, the other boys and the students, along with the girls, are wearing mostly green uniforms. Granted, some of the student councils are wearing white uniforms, but even so, that's still pretty messed up just to bitch about that. Honestly, I don't mind her wearing a schoolgirl uniform with it either, but I think she looks better in a uniform regardless of that, though. Regardless of all that, though, unfortunately, Utena seems to see some trouble with the main girl that she'll also be focusing on as well, though, Anthe. Anthe herself seems to have always gets slapped, and honestly, after witnessing it, Utena could not bear to see it, though. While trying to help her new in this situation now, she was forced to meet challenged into a duel. From the duels from themselves, though, it seems like Utena may be done for, but it's not just any duel. This is a sword duel, and as such, though, the sword duel itself is involved with the world revolution. In order to prove herself that she needs to protect the Rose Bride, she must always win the duels in order to have the Rose Bride with her and all such. Yeah, and as you can tell, the Rose Bride is, of course, Anthe. There have been many things about how it's going around this, but honestly, though, it's hard not to focus on what's going on here while still having a lot of that into it, though. No matter what happens, though, Utena will do anything he can to protect Anthe. See, this is what I mean when I say that the queer subtext. Maybe some people get this when they're younger, but I certainly didn't understand what they mean by queer subtext when going through watching this show. I mean, I've seen glimpses of this series, yes, but I wasn't really going into as much as I thought it would have, though. When I first heard about this show, I had no idea what I was getting into, and as such, though, it comes to my surprise that that's really what it would have been, though. Now, I wouldn't have that much of a problem with anything like that, but unfortunately, that's where I have to say something right here and now. You see, the first introduction I was introduced this was in 107 Facts About Steven Universe, and yeah, we'll come back to that in a bit, though. But my other introduction to it would have to be around Lily Orchard. Yeah, unfortunately, though, this is just like Little Witch Academia all over again because, like some other people who want to share their thoughts on it, though, she seems to misrepresented whatever this show has, though. Now, I must stress enough, though, if you don't like Revolutionary Girl Utena, that's perfectly fine. But if it's for this, your show, may I remind you, this is one of those shows that you would at least say it got influenced by not just Steven Universe from Rebecca Sugar of all things, but also influenced a lot of other creators out there, including Darren Nefsey, who gave us Star vs. the Forces of Evil, and of course Dana Terrence, who gave us The Owl House. Now I'm gonna ask you guys the question, no. Why is it every time that whenever Utena gets brought up from Lily, she has to misrepresent it? Like, most of the time she kept bitching about how this is not supposed to show romance or anything like that. Now, I must say, while the romance itself is not really the main focus of itself, I have to ask one question, though. Why does that matter? Because if anything, though, yeah, there is some queer subtext about both Utena and Anthe and such, though, but even with that said, however, they still managed to do this pretty well for itself, and I'm all for it. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has to be involved with something like this, but if you can get past all of that, there's nothing wrong with this show in particular that you can watch, though. So, after all that, though, let's talk about the characters. So, first there's Utena Tenjo, and like I said, she's really the schoolgirl tomboy, but I thought at first when watching this, I thought she'd be silent most of the time because of how noble she is, but I was proven wrong once again because dumbass me thought that this was just going to be one of those shows. Well, it seems like she has a lot of things going for her, though. I have to say, though, when she transforms into her Magical Girl Prince uniform that I'm showing on the picture right now, she looks pretty badass when it comes right down to it, though. Yeah, it's part of her school uniform, but honestly, I don't mind it as such, though. Then there's Anthe, who, while she is pretty much the opposite of what Utena is, not as brave as she is, though, she does have something lurking inside of her, though. And I'm not going to spoil too much about it, though, but I will say it does have its own set of things, though. Then we also have some of the student councils. Kyoichi, who's the green-haired one, and he's really egotistic at times. Like, no exaggeration. Sometimes even he can stress enough that he can be better than what meets the eye, though. And while I don't necessarily hate him, though, it does show signs of that anyways. Toga, the red-haired student council, is also the leader of the student council as well, though. And I must stress enough, though, he actually does show some signs that he has affection for Utena, but, well, I'm not gonna say too much, though. It's really no surprise that it would have been like that. Then there's Mickey, who, unlike the other two male council members, it seems like Mickey has a lot more better character than the other two have. He's gentle, sure, but he's also pretty kind, and he never seems to slap Utena every time he sees her, though, so I can at least give points for that. Though it's worth pointing out, if you ever do watch this show, you may think that they just put that timer on just for something else, but no. For some reason, they always have a timer for a running gag, though, but I'm guessing it's because of something else, maybe, but I wouldn't know, because that's really kind of weird to me. Some of the other characters are also the female characters, as you can see for yourself, though. There's also Juri, the orange-haired one, and yes, unlike Utena, she has a white uniform herself for being part of the council, though. But it's worth pointing out that she also has a girl that seems to really admire her very much, Yuri. And I have to say, though, I don't know how old these girls are supposed to be at times, though, but I have to say they do look pretty nice together, and it's all worth it when it comes right down to it. Then there's also Nanami. I fucking didn't want to talk about this character. Yeah, apparently a lot of people say that Nanami is really known to be the comic relief, but okay, I know I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but I never really cared for Nanami. I mean, I get that she's supposed to be the comic relief, and I get that she's supposed to be funny, and also I understand what they were going with her, but well, let me put it to you this way. What would happen if you had an older sibling that you're protective over, and you don't want anyone to compliment that sibling by any means, and really obsessed with them in a real obsessive, loving way? That's Utena's enemy in a nutshell. Yeah, Nanami is one of those characters I could not care less about. Yes, I know she's supposed to be funny. Yes, I know she's supposed to be the character that we're supposed to be rooting for to help protect her brother, and while I admit, yes, protecting your brother is one thing you want to do, I would not do it in an incestuous way. Yeah, for some reason they always play this as in, oh, it's cute because she loves her brother, but need to remind you, it's love in a way you don't want to get into when you have your siblings. If you don't know what that means, well, just look up the word incest when you're old enough to actually understand that word. There are other characters on the series, like, say, Kazumi, who's also Mickey's twin sister, and I must stress enough, I didn't really find anything interesting about her other than she's really a twin sister of Mickey's, but hey, at least he actually has a sister to support her by any means, though. Then there's Wakabe, and while I admit she can be annoying too, I think unlike Nanami, at least she actually does show she cares about those around her, though. It's also worth pointing out that in one episode, part of the Black Rose arc, she actually does seem to turn on Utena for one episode, all because she's been cursed by the Black Rose. Yeah, I'll get to the arcs in a bit, though. Then there's also some other characters along the way, and that we also do meet, but there's one character who seems to like Nanami, Mitsuru. Yeah, Mitsuru is an elementary school student, but I'm not gonna say anything about that, mostly because I don't want to be associated with an elementary school student who's with the junior high school students. I know he's younger than her, and I know that she's not in love with him either, but I'm just gonna leave my mouth shut because even I have to shut up at times. So after all of that, though, you may think that this year's sword duel would just be a Monster of the Week series, right? No, it's not anything like that. You see, I have to say this right here now. Utena's anime is not anything like that, and all of it is down to one thing, though. Yes, there are sword duels, but they're not really monsters that they're per se, unless you want to get to the main antagonist of the series. No, not Nanami, although that would be too much of a stretch. No, in this case, though, the antagonist of the series, while yes, duels are part of the series, even though they don't do that every episode. Yeah, they don't do it every episode, but I'm kind of glad they don't do it all the time, though, because there are most episodes where they will have a sword duel, while other times they won't have it, though. Sometimes they'll have other episodes that I guess you can count as filler, but I wouldn't say that because this was first a television series before it became a manga. Yeah, this is the same treatment that they had with Princess Tutu after, yes, though. It really came off as a show that you would think that they would have episodes to deal with a filler arc, but no, this was one of those cases where they had all episodes canon. And even if the manga itself really came out afterwards, though, I didn't really hear anything good things about the manga, though. Mostly because they changed a lot of things from the show and made it into something that, well, I guess you could say that both Utena and Anthe are supposed to be friends in the most literal sense you could make, though. Not friends in, say, they're girlfriends. I meant friends as in they're just there as friends. Like best friends or BFFs or anything. No. I'm starting to realize that they seem to have no problem with this show when it comes to dubbing it into English, but when it comes to something like, say, Sailor Moon, that's a problem. Yeah, I know that this show came out after Sailor Moon ended, but even with that said, however, I still have yet to ask how they got away with this show and not the other one. Maybe it's because it's more subtle here than it was there, but I wouldn't get past that if it was the case, though. Other than that, though, there was one character I want to discuss about that is the main antagonist, but let me go over something first before anything else, though. I said before that there were arcs in this year's series, and well, luckily there were only 3 of them. The first arc was the Student Council saga, which basically shows that the council is really not all of what it seems to play, though. This is basically Utena finding her footing as a prince, and honestly, though, while she does lose in this one of the last few episodes of that saga, I have to stress enough, though, she really does care for Anthe, even though at the first few glances she doesn't like being called Miss Utena. Yeah, I'm not sure what they said in the subtitle because I watched this dubbed by Central Park Media, and honestly, a lot of people seem to hate that dub for reason for Utena. I'm not sure if it's just me, but I actually don't mind the dub. Yeah, it's dubbed by Central Park Media, which is not around anymore because they are mostly known for having kids dub voice actors like Rachael Lillis, who played Utena and the like, though. But even with that said, however, it's filled with actors you may be familiar with if you grew up with Pokemon or 4Kids dubs. As for me, well, I may not be a huge 4Kids fan like I used to be when I was a kid, but even with that said, however, I still don't mind having the dub right here, though. Yeah, it could age a bit, though, for some extension, but at least they didn't chop anything up like Sailor Moon did. Okay, that's enough about the dubs, though. About the sagas themselves. I already mentioned the Student Council saga, and there was, of course, the second saga arc called the Black Rose saga. And this one is where a lot of the students, random students, mind you, have a challenge with Utena to get Rose Bride didn't get them for themselves, though. It's basically just students who seem to be pretty close to those around either Utena or one of the council members, so make your own bet there. Though I must stress enough, though, there was one episode of this saga I really could not stand. It was basically an episode about Nanami getting a cowbell for herself, and while I admit she does have to have her own style, unlike what Utena said, I still have yet to ask if it I want to remember the part where she thinks she was a cow. If you watch this show like I have, you probably have remembered that, but I'm just gonna say this right here and now. I could not get through that episode without taping my ears shut. And not for the reasons you may assume. Other than that, though, they're really played by the main antagonist, though, so he can get what he wants, but his main role goes into the Apocalypse Saga, which basically sounds like what it sounds like. For anyone to take the world revolution and just make it into a revolutionary, though. I don't want to spoil the ending for you because I'm just gonna say it did tear me up, though. At least until they follow with the movie Adolescent Utena, which I'll get to in a minute. Before we get into anything else, however, there's kind of a reason why I myself in particular wanted to talk about this show in detail, though. You see, in case you don't know, I'm part of the LGBT community, but also I am, first and foremost, a bisexual masculine woman, or as you like to wanted me to call me, I'm a tomboy. And before you say anything, no, this doesn't mean about transitioning, no. And I bring this up because most of the time this here show seems to have a lot of LGBT themes, and they were not afraid to show it. So when I was going to talk about Revolutionary Girl Utena, I was informed that a lot of people were going to say to me that this was one of those shows that just happens to have a tomboy protagonist, and someone told me that it is the only main protagonist who has a tomboy magical girl in it, which I understand where they're coming from, but I think you may have gotten mixed up with other magical girl tomboys out there, because there have been other tomboys in media that were magical girl shows and the like. Oh, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you can't make a tomboy into a magical girl, but I'm not sure what people were thinking when they say that there were no other tomboys in media. And for the most part, though, while Utena does have those strengths, though, she never really claimed herself to be an masculine position, like say she wants to transition. She is very tomboyish in her own way, though, but I'd argue that she probably doesn't care what she is, to the point where she can be more dominant than you may think she is. I'd say this would be the same about the other characters, but they never really showed most of the signs of that, unless you want to count Juri and also with Shiori. I mean, yeah, you could make the argument that this was supposed to be an LGBT themed series, but I'm guessing it's really subtled in there, so you probably wouldn't understand it at first glance. But the biggest thing about Utena is that she usually questions about herself. Not about her sexuality, but about if she is willing to be a prince, because some people thought that was queer. And I'm not sure how many people would find that as a slur. What I'm trying to say is that it's not hard to find people out there who you do find attracted to. When I first saw this show, I thought at first it was just going to be your just noble fairy tale anime, because that's what I thought at first, though, before watching it. Then again, I did recommend this to Miss yeah, so maybe I'm better off for it anyways. But the thing that the show has helped you find your identity, don't worry, this wasn't the only show that helped anyone else out, though. I mentioned before this show had a lot of influence with a lot of other creators. You already heard me say about Darren Nefsey and as well as Dana Terrence, even though Dana Terrence is one of those creators that I could only hope to dream about to become my own creator. Very far from what it is, though. But it's also worth pointing out that if you've seen something like, say, Steven Universe, then you've probably heard of Revolutionary Girl Utena. Or if you didn't, like I have when I was watching Steven Universe, you've seen these references in the show. The dance with both Greg and Rose Quartz dancing with each other, the influence that both of the love has with Ruby and Sapphire, the sword duel with Pearl and Hollow Pearl. All of these references meant to say Revolutionary Girl Utena, because Rebecca Sugar herself was inspired by this show, and yes, she was inspired by other anime, but this is where most of this queer subtext came from. And if you think that's really me saying that's just for praise, I mean it as in that's a lot of passion and praise. Like, it takes a lot to make something like Steven Universe, an influential Cartoon Network show that was on during the time, and make it into something that own. And honestly, props to Rebecca Sugar for finding her footing when it comes to that. I mean, sure, you may not get the references at first glance, I certainly didn't, but when first watching Revolutionary Girl Utena, I said to myself, hey, I saw that on Steven Universe. And guess what? It really was on that influence in itself, though. But the problem is not that I don't like it when people don't use their influence like that. No, the biggest problem why I had something with this has to do with Lily Orchard. Yeah, I said before that Lily happened to misrepresent this show, and honestly, I wouldn't really recommend watching this show in front of her, though. Even if you try to prove her an opinion that's not really something that should be taken seriously, she'll just basically do everything she can to stomp on it. And I'm not gonna lie, she does that all the time with her audiences nowadays. Even if you don't like Lily Orchard, or if you never heard of her, I still wouldn't recommend watching her thoughts on Revolutionary Girl Utena. Mostly because she'll just downplay it, and she'll just talk down to you regardless of that, though. But don't worry, I'll do a take-on video on her maybe sometime. I don't know when exactly, but I have a lot of words to say about that woman. I'm just saying. Though, let's get back to the show itself. Now, you may think that I've only glossed over the characters and not talk about the main antagonist of the show. Well, that's because in this series, the main antagonist of the show is not really any of the student councils, surprisingly. They do act like that, surprisingly, because of what they want to do with the Rose Bride Anthe herself, and Utena's doing everything she can to help her out. Well, it's time we talk about the main antagonist of the show. and one that I have a lot of choice words to say. So strap yourself in, folks, because it's going to be a long one. Okay, so what you need to know is that there's this man by the name of Akio, and he is Anthony's older brother. And newsflash, I don't want to be that guy, but I don't want to say too much about this your individual because there's just going to count as spoilers, even if you've seen something like, say, Dios, the prince who was helping Utena in the beginning of your show, though. I don't want to spoil too much of this your show for you if you want to see it for yourself, though, but Akio is one of those characters I could not care less about. And according to the comments I've seen on YouTube when I first started watching the show for myself to binge through it in January, because that's how long it took me, yeah, this show was not easy for me to binge. I started watching it in May, then in June, and I didn't go back to it until September, though I couldn't really go back to it because I had a family member who was going through a lot, though. Yeah, I don't want to go through what happened, though, but I think you can already tell what it is if you've known me for a while now. As you can tell, though, I didn't really get through this show until January of this year, so I had really a lot of time to watch whatever I could before I started thinking to myself I should make a Magical Girl podcast, though admittedly I didn't want to make it mostly because I didn't want anyone thinking I would do that for the sake of it, though. Okay, so what you need to know about Akio is, well, like the comments beforehand, though, I'm just gonna say this. He is an asshole. And no, I don't mean that in a funny kind of way, asshole. He's basically one that I don't even think I could tell you without any warning, though. So I'm gonna warn you right here now, though. What I'm about to tell you about this character should terrorize you. Should really go ahead and say, I do not want to associate with this guy if he was here in real life. Because otherwise, he's really not one of those characters you want to associate with, though. Not only does he do anything to make himself look better, though, and he's also the prince who was previous like that, though, but he was also the one who was also made him Utena inspired to become a prince himself when he was Dios. And Akio does disturbing things to not just Anthe but Utena as well. In case they couldn't tell already, they didn't do it on screen, but let me tell you right now, it was further proof that he outright raped his own sister, as well as Utena. Now, it wasn't on screen, in case anyone's gonna say, though, because this show is pretty subtle in itself, though. Though, admittedly, I wouldn't say it's too for adults to watch it. Maybe if the 90s kids watched this, I'm certainly not a 90s kid, so I wouldn't know. Maybe they thought it was just played for just suspense, but that suspense really gets you chilling in your spines when you realize how much of a fucking damaged guy Akio is. Not only is he really that much of a real scumbag, but he's also pretty much a disgusting person in spite of all that, though. And even worse is that, though, is to me, Anthe and Utena, no matter how hard you look at it, they're pretty close to each other. Sure, you could make the argument that throughout the series they just consider themselves as friends, but come on. If you're anyone like me who's part of the LGBT community, although yes, there are dangerous people out there in that community in itself, you can already tell Utena and Anthe were made for each other. I don't care what people say out there, I will still call them a couple to the day I die, even if I do get stabbed in the back. Yeah, Anthe stabs Utena in the back because she doesn't think she could really have a female prince or something like that, but she also wanted to save her from any kind of challenge that would have been like that. I'm not going to spoil too much about it, though, but let's just say the ending of the series was pretty much a cherry on top what happens to Dio, though. And yeah, I'm not going to spoil what happened to Utena, though, but Anthe does do her best where it could, though. Okay, so now that you know about that, let's talk about the movie, because honestly, some people say it's canon, and some people say it isn't. So let's talk about the movie. Now, I must stress enough, though, the movie itself is really a separate continuity to the series, but if you want to watch this show for yourself, and then the movie, that's how I recommend watching it. I wouldn't recommend and saying, "Oh, you have to watch the movie first before you get into the show." No, the show itself came out in 1997, whereas the movie came out in 2 years later. So while I'm on the subject matter, though, I have trust enough both of them do a pretty good job of what they're supposed to be, though. They were both animated by JC Staff, and while I have seen a lot of their stuff, though, that really comes into play when I say that this is a Yuri series. The Yaoi series they've worked on was Earthian, but I highly doubt any of my audience knows anything about Earthian. I'll tell you what it is. It's a Yaoi series, and I don't plan on watching it again after being depressed and falling asleep. Okay, back to the indolence of Utena. I must say, though, this is one case where I don't think anyone has ever seen before now, but it's also worth pointing out that it does have something to do with them as close friends and all that such, though. One thing I will say, though, is that the movie itself was actually pretty damn fantastic all around. Now, I'm gonna stress enough, though, I did not know anything about this movie for itself, though. Now, I will say, though, the first thing you're gonna know about this movie is that in Utena, for some reason, she also came back from Juvie Hall. Again, I know this is separate continuity and she's really a tomboy and such, but come on, in Juvie Hall? I guess that tomboy thing was taken too literally, though. Okay then, but it also serves as a metaphor of what comes into later on, though, as while they do progress themselves into being in one with each other. Well, but it's worth pointing out that I actually don't mind what they do with them as they could, though. One thing we need to know about this your movie is that it can be either way, though. Like, the story itself is basically Sleeping Beauty if instead of having the princess fall asleep, it's really the prince who falls asleep. And yes, before you say anything, Utena and Anthony are made for each other, and I won't hear a word against it. One thing I will say, though, is that Utena, for some reason, instead of just putting her to sleep because she's the prince, she gets turned into a car. Yeah, but honestly, from what I've heard on Wikipedia, it's supposed to be a metaphor of that she's put into sleep. And I'm not gonna put too much words into my mouth when I say that, but that's all to it, though. Oh, and there's also these shadow figures I forgot to mention in the show, but yeah, they appear in the movie as well. These shadow figures are, well, if you've seen Steven Universe, you already know this, though, but the other shadow figures who go, "Did you know? Did you know?" Oh, or something like that. Yeah, they go extra, extra, or something like that, but I'm not gonna say too much about it. It does get annoying at first glance. It certainly annoyed me when first watching it, though, but I think I was able to get used to it because of for watching the show as myself, though. In the movie itself, I have to say, though, it's really more than what meets the eye, though. Yeah, with all the flaws I've mentioned about this show, this actually had a pretty good movie in spite of all that, though. But even with that said, however, I'm so glad I got to see Revolutionary Girl Utena. It's influential, it's deep, it's dark, it's depressing, it's beautiful, and a lot of people tell me this is Evangelion if it was made for a female audience, which I can fault them for saying, because let's be honest, Ava in of itself was made in the prior of the 90s. So if you're anyone who's into something like, say, a queer demographic of anime, you can't really go wrong with something like this, though. I mean, sure, I understand that a lot of people are not going to get into it as much, and let's be honest, though, I'm tired of people saying to me all the time that, oh, the sub is better than the dub. Guys, I don't care which is better, as long as I'm actually watching something for my entertainment. I don't really see a problem with it in that regard, though. And honestly, though, I wouldn't have it either way, though. If anything, though, I have to be stressed enough, though. I wouldn't be so much of a piece of crap if I weren't going to be doing so already, though. Maybe I wasn't planning on talking about this show in it myself, though, but I think what really got to me about this show entirely is that I really wanted to see this for myself and see where it takes me, and I don't regret it. Revolutionary Girl Utena is a a fantastic series. It's not a series I don't think everyone's gonna get into, but I was gonna plan on doing this in June because, well, June is but a month. But hey, at least I have an episode for you guys to watch on yourselves if you want to see it. Though I know it's not gonna appeal to everyone in the community, and what's more, some people may think it's aged a bit, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just so much in love with this show already that I still love what they did here, though. Next time, well, I'm just gonna say this though. It's gonna be a sweet anime, and I figured why not? Another Magical Girls show on Friday. But until then, thank you all so much for listening to this podcast, and I really do hope you all appreciate it. If you like this video so much, please click like and subscribe for more content. And as always, thank you so much, and as always, stay flamingotastic. See ya!